Major funding for NPT Reports Domestic Violence is provided by Waller, supporting the legal needs of Nashville's business community for more than 100 years. Time and again, our clients come for the lawyer, but stay for the firm. The First Tennessee Foundation, dedicated to strengthening the vital signs of our healthy communities. The Women's Fund of the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, dedicated to transforming the lives of women and girls and improving the well-being of our entire community. And members of NPT, thank you.
I want you to stop and think for a moment about who domestic violence affects. It affects men, it affects women, it affects children, young boys and young girls who will grow up and repeat behaviors they see in their childhood homes. It affects people in poverty, it affects the middle class, it affects people on the high end of the economic spectrum.
Often young people grow up and they think this is what love is. This is how you're respected in a relationship, and that's not true.
There's love in here. These are relationships. There's an incredible level of shame and guilt involved in this issue. It is the ugly side of our family. It's the ugly thing that happens at home. It happens in our home.
Young women are growing up thinking that it's okay for him to hit me. It's okay for him to slap me around because he loves me.
When you have looked in the face of someone, and I have, who said, "I'm going to kill you," and they mean to, you never forget that face. Fear is a great motivator of humans.
If I changed the way I was, maybe he wouldn't hit me. Maybe he wouldn't scream at me or call me these ugly names that he used to call me or do the things that he used to do. And I changed a lot. I used to be a bubbly, outgoing person, and I became very depressed and sour and serious, and I lost me.
It doesn't matter what they do or what they don't do, the violence is going to happen.
If what you're telling me is the truth, this is the first time that this offender has hit you, this won't be the last time. We need to figure out how can we keep them from being a victim again and again? How can we break that cycle?
Domestic violence occurs at a staggering rate in Nashville. While major crime is down, the number of homicides attributed to domestic violence remains high. In 2013, 11 people were killed by a loved one. At the urging of victim advocates, the mayor's office led a 100-member task force to review how the city handles domestic violence across all departments: courts, police, sheriff's department, the district attorney's office, and 911 responders. The 18-month review resulted in a comprehensive report closing safety gaps for domestic violence victims. Among the findings, the average wait for a police officer to respond to a domestic violence in-progress call is about 20 minutes. The average time between arrest and first court appearance is 49 days, and nearly 2/3 of domestic violence cases were dropped by judges or prosecutors over a 6-month period in 2012. The report outlined goals and changes that Mayor Dean says will be implemented by September 2014. Here today to talk about how Nashville responds to domestic violence is Whitney McFalls, Domestic Violence Coordinator, a position created as a direct result of the assessment. Kathy Gurley, Executive Director of You Have the Power. Judge Peter McDonald, retired district judge and YWCA board member. And Judge Angelita Dalton, Davidson County General Sessions Court. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. When you were gathering this data, these anecdotes and really documented cases are pretty powerful. That is part of the 185-page review that was done. Those stories are not stories that we have seen. So tell us a little bit about what the thinking was in compiling that document, but releasing the report of recommendations.
Well, with 100 people doing different analyses and ride-alongs with police officers, looking at the court process itself, reviewing records, interviewing individuals, it was an enormous amount of work. I never forget our committee, the court committee, first time we got together said we can probably do this in 2 weeks. And, I think we met for a year.
That's a long way from 18 months.
We met every week, every single week for at least 2.5 hours for a year to compile all the information about the court. So that was just our particular committee. Then what we did is generate from our committee a specific thing that's in the 185 pages, and each of the other committees did the same. So it was what we produced was based upon what our observations, our examination of dockets, of court files, and that's what and I'm sure each of the other committees did the same.
Obviously, the mayor sent up special counsel to do this assessment because we knew the system was somehow broken. But what I know that I found, and I was very impressed and made me so proud to be a part of the city, is in every department people wanted to do the right thing, from the courts, from the police to the DA. But as you get into your daily routine, sometimes things don't become as clear as they should be. And that's what I found this process to be marvelous, because we admitted that we all had some work to do. And they were all so willing to sort of take off their hats and sit at the table and produce a great system. These reports are being implemented. They started being implemented while we were still in the process.
We want you to take a listen to what Mayor Dean and District Attorney Tory Johnson had to say in announcing this recommendations report.
The District Attorney's Office created a specialized domestic violence unit. One judge began to provide a private space for DAs to meet with victims. The Domestic Violence Division of the Police Department took significant first steps toward the creation of a high-risk assessment team. And the courts, in an effort to reduce delay, began to place a certain number of domestic violence bond docket cases on the jail docket.
Some of it's personnel, just not having enough people, not having enough boots on the ground to do the job. The mayor provided 2 new prosecutors to our office, full-time in domestic violence, which gives us an 11-person team and gets us back to the staffing we had in 2003. We now have 6 assistant district attorneys and 5 victim witness coordinators. One thing we did was move and make sure the entire team was together, physically together. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it improves communication. The other thing that staffing did was to put an emphasis on holding offenders accountable. We can be more consistent about revoking bonds when necessary, pushing for probation revocations when people violate the terms and conditions. Sometimes agreements are entered into where prosecution is deferred for one way or another if the offender will do certain things. But if they don't do those, we need to be able to reactivate those cases.
Did you get the sense that people were surprised at some of the things you found, people that worked in those departments, to see it sort of documented?
Some probably were. But I'll give you an example of how open people would be. I had the pleasure of interviewing Judge Dalton with Mark Beveridge and Elaine McDonald, and she devoted probably close to 2 hours of her day talking with us about how she dealt with domestic violence cases, both in the order protection docket as well as the criminal docket. And it was just invaluable what she told us about how things worked. So it gave me, as well as Mark and Elaine too, a better feeling about how cases were actually handled before I ever had an opportunity to go even and look at the process, which it could be different. It could be different in her court and the other judges, so they were all different.
One of the concerns that I shared with them was something that's already been mentioned, and that's the volume of cases that we see. With the volume of cases, and then with the current docketing system that we have, particularly with the criminal cases, that the current system is usually the reason for the delay. I think that at the time that this study was implemented, well, at the time that the study started, we were looking at about a 49-day delay from the time of arrest and the time that the case first appeared, a person appeared on a docket. Well, because of some of those concerns, in the midst of all of this, the judges who hear domestic violence cases in general session says, well, why don't we add some cases to our jail docket so that we can try to get the cases on the dockets sooner? In fact, in the middle of that, I actually went into the domestic violence rotation so that I could try to help to ease the delay that we had. We tried to look at some of the things that we saw happening with the order of protection docket. Under our current system, and that is scheduled to change in September, but under our current system, it was a situation where we would have our order protection docket at 8:30, and then at 9 o'clock we were supposed to be ready to start our criminal dockets. Well, there's really no way to efficiently hear.
Half an hour.
Yeah.
And you have more than one case.
Absolutely. So some things that we implement, that we did in the middle of the study was to try to separate the docket so that we could devote more time to hearing the orders of protection and still have ample time for the criminal cases to be heard as well. And so, and we're actually looking at some other changes that we intend to implement come September. In fact, we're doing a complete overhaul of how the General Sessions Court operates. And
not just related to domestic violence.
Not exactly, but a major component of that is domestic violence. We're actually going to have a court that is dedicated to hearing nothing but domestic violence cases, and that's it.
Okay, and that's supposed to start by September?
That's the goal.
Okay. One of the words I remember seeing was trying to fast track cases, move them more swiftly through the system.
Well, I like to use the term efficient. Because fast is not always good, but efficient, I think, is key. And a part of efficiency is making sure that cases are timely heard.
The more compressed the time is from the beginning to the end, the better off it is for everyone, including the offender.
Well, and I want to talk about that in a minute, but Kathy or Whitney, it might be important to establish why that's so important. A lot of people don't realize in these cases that's a very high risk time. I mean, if you are victimized in another type of crime, there may not be an opportunity to interact with the offender, but this is a pretty high risk time for these folks, this 49-day period, isn't it?
It is a high risk time. It's the most dangerous time for a battered woman when she leaves. A lot of people think that that's not a dangerous time, that if she just left, everything would be okay. But it's the first 3 to 6 months are the most dangerous time for a victim. And that's when she's most likely to be murdered during that time. 75% of the murders occur after separation in a domestic violence case. So it's a time for at least the metro systems, if we can get to her quickly and start safety planning, like in the Victim Resource Center, and with her victim witness coordinator and the judges and the DAs to be involved at a quicker pace, we can get her more resources.
And so back to something you touched on, Judge McDonnell, about the offender. In this 49-day period, innocent until proven guilty, I mean, you've got somebody who may be out on bond, right?
Correct.
And that is where the other part of this vulnerability comes in, correct?
Oh, yeah.
How are, from the beginning, how are offenders treated? Is the bond something that has been addressed or needs to be addressed?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the night court utilizing the 12-hour mandatory hold a little bit more often. That can be waived by the commissioners, and they seem to do it maybe too often. If nothing else, those 12 hours would give someone an opportunity to develop some safety planning, maybe get an order of protection, just do many steps like that. That would be very good. And I know that it's hard to predict what someone is going to do. But in domestic violence cases, unlike any other case that judges face or police officers or anyone, that you're looking at potential homicides in every single case. Okay. They may not result in that, but you're looking at the potential for that, unlike a bad check or maybe a burglary or something else. And the study indicated, the assessment indicated that there needs to be more work done on lethality and risk assessments, and that's being done. And there are models. There's one in Massachusetts, there's one in Canada, in Maryland, that you can more accurately predict who is more likely to be someone who's going to cause death.
Really?
And they're working toward that. They're looking at those type of models.
Is it like some kind of psychological assessment or something?
It's almost a lot of past behaviors is what it is.
I want to back up to something you said about the mandatory 12-hour hold. What did the research find was happening? You said you'd like to see it implemented a little more often. Give me some examples.
Well, in my own experience in Kentucky, we had mandatory 24-hour hold, and that was ordered by our Chief Justice. And we had a unified court system, which is a little bit different than it is in Tennessee, that there's it would be a policy be established that the judges would establish, I guess, primarily. But it just, if nothing else, it shows, it sends a message to that offender that, ooh, I'm being taken seriously, because they've been.
Well, what is happening now in a lot of cases? Are they gone out in an hour?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was trying to
I'm
find.
sorry. I'm sorry. No, that's exactly right. The 12-hour hold is not utilized, and then they make bond, or they don't make bond. But they don't make it. If they don't make it, it's because they don't have the money or something. But
and that probably comes in conjunction with an order of protection by the victim. But there's only so much that can provide in terms of security, correct? Kathy, you want to address that?
Yes, and when the offender sees that the rules are not being enforced, that it's not being taken seriously, it just strengthens their resolve often to go back and create more violence.
Okay.
a lot of the offender behavior is really what judges should be doing to offenders, and that is, I set the rules. You know, I'm gonna clarify the rules so you understand all the rules. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen if you violate the rules, and then you have some swift and sure consequences for violation of them, such as if they're out on bond, they violate the bond somehow, that they violate order of protection, whatever, jail.
My impression is these are some of the most vulnerable victims in the criminal justice system, because they are victimized repeatedly, in many cases, by the same offender. What was your impression about the thing that struck you the most about what these victims experience?
I know that dramatic changes have been made and will be made, but it even became a very intimidating process for those who were victims, either in the criminal cases or in the civil cases when they came to court, because of the sheer number of cases there and the sheer lack of, feeling of safety while you're in the courtroom itself, because you may be sitting next to the person who has assaulted you.
And here's an observation in Davidson County Circuit Court by Judge Philip Smith.
Think about it as just a non-victim coming to court on, say, a civil matter or minor traffic issue. The court system can be intimidating to someone who's not a victim, but a victim of domestic violence is coming in not knowing if the defendant is going to be there, going to be present. They're not familiar with the courtroom setting. There may be a language barrier. The fear of a victim is a real concern. Even once getting into the courtroom, there can be a fear, a stare down, looks calculated at intimidating the victim. So these are real fears that we have to address.
You're standing right next to the person who may have done this to you, and it was not conducive to telling the story correctly and truthfully and in its entirety.
We did some victim interviews at court over the summer months. We had different interns interview victims about their experience in the court. We did court observation. People took notes and interviewed judges and spent time in night court and circuit court and the criminal courts.
And so what he said is pretty much accurate to what you observed.
Yes, that is what we found. We have victims who call us, and you can hear it in their voice, I have to go to court, and they don't want to go by themselves. And you might think, well, what's the big deal? But you go in there and you see it takes everything in them to just get to that courtroom. And then, as he said, he may be getting stared at. When they are called, they may be standing right next to each other. It's a very intimidating and uncomfortable process.
Really, the most important part of the case perhaps may be the initial phone call to 911 and then the arrival of the first responders, the law enforcement officers. And the information that the 911 officers receive, of course, that's all taped. That's kept as part of a record. So that, under some circumstances, it can be admitted into court. Then when law enforcement show up at the scene, they are the eyes and the ears for the DA's office. And then also for judges to ultimately hear what took place, because it's one thing for Judge Dalton to read maybe what took place or to hear what someone else says, but unless it's a good record, it's not going to result in a conviction or an order of protection. So
that's a really important point. The eyes and ears of the whole process starts here.
Right, they do with 911 and with law enforcement. So it's so important for the law enforcement officers as well as the 911 terminal operators to be fully trained on domestic violence and what to look for, including if there were children present. And when I say present, I don't mean that they're in the room where it occurred, if they were in the house or the apartment or in the yard or wherever it took place. Because children are very impressionable, as anyone who has kids knows, and they're going to take in everything that's taken place. And so it's so important. And they could be, the officers feel uncomfortable. We did the study showed that they felt uncomfortable interviewing children because they hadn't had any training on it.
Sure, it's a certain skill set.
And then it's very difficult. And it may place that child at risk too if the offender sees the law enforcement officer saying, "What did your daddy do to you?" or whatever else, so, things like that. So you got to be very careful how you do it. And building a case so that it may be unlikely that the person, the woman who's actually been the victim of abuse may not come to court for any number of reasons, out of fear, out of whatever reason that they may have, they're not coming back. But if the state chooses to go ahead and prosecute, that they are able to do so. And most people say, well, if she doesn't testify, there's no case. Well, who testifies in a murder case? The victim doesn't testify. So you can build a case, and it would be through this good police practice, investigative practice, and I'm not sure if there changes are being made to the reports that police make. Figures of, skeleton, a body where injuries were, taking pictures. Sometimes pictures of like strangulation don't show up immediately. But that's where the DVD unit later on, the domestic violence unit from the police department can come in later and take those pictures. But it requires hard work. It is the most counterintuitive, frustrating case that anyone can have, whether you're a law enforcement officer, a prosecutor, an advocate, a judge. They're hard to deal with.
And in reading some of the recommendations, it's very interesting where some of the specialization comes in, even how 911 calls are answered and interpreted can make a difference, and just what the circumstances are in the home. Speak to that a little bit, Kathy, about how training and knowledge can make a difference from that very first point of contact.
Well, consistency obviously increases quality, and that's what you're talking about. When we have the training, then we will have consistency all the way through. Like I said earlier, I think this is what all of our departments and all of our agencies want. They want to do the best job, and they now are learning how to hand that information up and down the chain, as you said, to make it effective and to keep our city safe.
What Kathy is very important. It was amazing. The report, the background information indicates that each of these departments is sort of crying out for education. They want training because they know that once now we talked about this some, I think they realize even more how important it is and how dangerous these cases are, and they want to be able to do the right thing, so they want to learn about it.
And can it be sometimes as simple as how you verbalize things? I mean, we're talking about things as simple as how you talk, right, in responding to these cases.
Yes, I know on the police ride-along that I did, and we did actually have a DV case that night, and you could tell the way the officer approached the woman and addressed her, you almost could see her relaxing, melding kind of thing, that she felt safe, and just having somebody look her, talking to her in a nice tone and asking her questions. And I mean, he was just taking information, but you could see that it was very, very effective.
And that needs to continue, as we've said, through the process. And one of the things I gather that is in the works to help with that is the Victim Resource Center, and having advocates every step of the way that can bring that level of understanding and awareness about how to deal with these victims. Whitney, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, the Mayor Dean has gotten us space in the Ben West building for a victim resource center that will hire 10 to 12 advocates, and part of the planning process for that has been to work on a curriculum for training. We're starting with the training for the advocates, and we're going to expand that to training of anybody in Metro that comes in contact with a domestic violence victim, from a security guard at night court to a judge on the bench. So we are in the process of working on a curriculum that will benefit everybody within the process.
When might that be implemented?
It should be this year.
Okay. And will this be required training, like a certain number of hours required? How will that?
For the advocates, it will certainly be a required amount of training. We're planning on certifying any of the advocates that work there and certifying any other advocates in the system that do volunteer work. And we want Metro to implement, at least yearly, if not twice a year, training for the rest of the employees.
It does sound like hard work, and it's certainly multifaceted, and it needs to be a comprehensive approach. And you all have spent quite a bit of time coming up with these recommendations. Thank you for being here with us and for sharing your findings and your thoughts with us. And with a commitment to domestic violence victims and their children, and through coordination of these efforts like those we talked about today, the city's goal is to improve its response to domestic violence and save lives. Thanks for joining us.
Women should never let violence reach a certain level before they allow the police to come into their home. That's dangerous, because a shove today is a punch tomorrow, and then who knows what afterwards.
I want them to know that the city cares, that as a city that we do not want any woman to be victimized or any woman hurt. And if there is any way that we can help, we will help. And our goal is to make sure that any woman who comes to the city or comes to the police or the criminal justice system with a complaint or comes to us with a story of violence, that there is the appropriate response. And my pledge would be that as long as I'm mayor, if that's not occurring, I want to know about it. I am very confident that we will have all the significant players, be it the Sheriff's Department, the District Attorney's Office, the police, the courts, on board, working together to make sure that we are taking this issue with all the seriousness it deserves, and to make sure we're doing everything within our powers to serve these women and to protect them.
The assessment has shined the light on gaps in our community, opportunities for improvement. By closing these gaps in our system, women and children will be safer, and women and children will live.